There are stories that are told, and then there are stories that are felt. They are not just tales of ghosts or monsters, but of places and things that defy our understanding of the world. They speak of a hunger that lingers in the soil, joy that comes at a terrible price, and of a sorrow so profound it attracts its own kind of predator. They remind us that the world is older and stranger than we can ever truly know. Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we unearth 5 such tales. We will stand at the edge of a vampire's grave, wander the midway of a carnival that feeds on souls, and descend into the cold, quiet morgue, where a ghoul finds its feast. We will endure a silent night, where the only sound is your own heart, beater beacon for the things that hunt the quiet. And we will be lost in a forest that is not just alive, but aware. Prepare yourself. The first story is about to begin. The first sign the grave was hungry was the silence of the earth around it. I am an archival historian, specializing in the preservation of forgotten cemeteries. My work is slow, methodical, and quiet. A conversation with the dead spoken in whispers of dirt and stone. I was contracted by a small, insular community in the foothills of the Appalachians to restore their oldest burial ground, a place they called St. Giles' Rest. It was a beautiful, melancholic place, choked with ivy and tilting headstones. But one grave stood apart. It was a massive, slate-black sarcophagus, unadorned by any cross or angel, bearing a single, deeply carved word, Strigoi. The local folklore claimed it was the final resting place of the town's founder, a Romanian nobleman who had arrived under a dark cloud of suspicion centuries ago. They called him a vampire, a story I dismissed as provincial superstition. Sarcophagus was my primary task. It was cracked, and the town elders wanted it sealed to protect it from the elements. But as I began my preliminary work, I noticed the anomalies. The soil in a 10-foot radius around the sarcophagus was utterly dead. No weeds, no insects, not even microbial life, according to my soil samples. It was sterile, black, and cold, too. A touch, even under the sweltering July sun. Furthermore, anything organic that touched it seemed to wither. A leather glove I accidentally left on the lid overnight was brittle and gray by morning, its oils seemingly leached away. It was a fascinating, localized blight, and I documented it with academic curiosity, my mind refusing to entertain the darker possibilities. The first week was spent clearing the surrounding area. It was during this time I began to feel persistent, low-grade fatigue. I chalked it up to the heat and manual labor, but it was more than that. It was a deep, cellular weariness, a feeling of being drained. I started waking up in my small rented cabin, feeling more tired than when I went to sleep. My throat dry, my skin pale. My log entries from that time show my handwriting becoming shakier, my thoughts less organized. The whispers started in the second week. They came at the edge of hearing, seeming to rise from the cold, dead soil itself. Faint, sibilant sounds that mimicked the rustle of leaves, but there was no wind. There were promises of rest, of a deep, dreamless sleep, of an end to all weariness. I found myself drawn to the sarcophagus, my hand tracing the cold, smooth stone. It felt soothing. I would sit by its side for hours, the afternoon sun beating down, feeling a strange sense of peace as the profound exhaustion washed over me. It felt like coming home. The turning point came when I found the book. It was a hidden addendum in the town's archives, a leather-bound journal written by the priest who had overseen the founder's burial. His entries were frantic, terrified, but poem. He wrote that the nobleman, Strigoi, was not a man, but a vessel for something far older, an entity of hunger, a thing that did not drink blood, but life. It didn't feed on the body, but on the vital essence of the land and those who walked it. He wrote that they could not destroy it, so they entombed it, hoping to starve it. The sarcophagus wasn't a grave to hold a body. It was a prison to contain a parasite. His final chilling entry read, "The stone is not enough. The grave itself has taken on the affliction. It has become a mouth. God help anyone who tries to open it, for they will not be releasing a prisoner, but feeding a hunger that has waited for centuries." My blood ran cold. The fatigue, the pale skin, the whispers it wasn't in my head. The grave was feeding on me. The ground around it wasn't sterile because it was blighted. It was sterile because it had been consumed. The grave was a vampire, and I was its first real meal in centuries. I packed my bags that night, determined to leave at dawn, to report my findings to a historical society far away, to warn someone, anyone. But as I lay in my bed, a profound lethargy pinned me to the mattress. My limbs felt like lead. The whispers were no longer outside. They were, in my mind, a sweet, irresistible lullaby. Rest. They coo. You are so tired. The earth is cool and quiet. Just a little longer. Just one more day. I knew I was being digested. My life force slowly being siphoned across the mile of woods to that hungry stone. I fought it. I forced myself to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I stumbled to my car, my vision tunneling. As I drove away from that town, I could feel it pulling at me, the physical tether of exhaustion, a psychic hook buried deep in my soul. I could feel the grave's anger, its frustration, as its meal slipped away. The whispers turned to shrieks of rage in my mind. I never fully recovered. The doctors call it chronic fatigue syndrome, an unexplained autoimmune disorder. But I know the truth. A part of me is still there, in that dead soil, forever feeding the grave of the vampire. My energy, my vitality, a piece of my soul is trapped, a constant, slow drip of life into an ancient, patient hunger. And sometimes, on the worst nights, when the exhaustion is so profound, I can barely breathe. I can still hear the whisper from that slate-black sarcophagus. They are no longer promises of rest. They are the patient, confident murmur of a predator that knows, sooner or later, all tired things must come home to the grave. The carnival only came to our town once, a lifetime ago, when I was 10. It didn't arrive with posters or parades. It simply appeared one sweltering August morning. Its striped tents and skeletal Ferris wheel materializing in the fallow field at the edge of town like a strange, garish fungus. They called it the Carnival of Curios and Ephemera, and its arrival was a fever dream in our dusty, forgotten corner of the world. The calliope music was just a little too discordant, the colors of the tents a little too bright, bleeding at the edges in the summer haze. My friends and I scraped together our allowances and went on the second night. The air under the strings of bare yellow bulbs was thick with the smell of popcorn, ozone, and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old pennies and wilting roses. The carnies were a strange collection of silent, waxen-faced people, whose eyes seemed to follow you with a profound, weary sadness. They never spoke, only gestured, their movements slow and deliberate. The games were what I remember most clearly. They weren't games of skill or chance. They were games of memory. At the river of recollection, you didn't shoot ducks. You had to describe, in perfect detail, the face of your mother on your 5th birthday. The carny, a man with a perpetually downturned mouth, would nod slowly, and a grimy, stuffed bear would be pushed into your hands. I won. And as I walked away, I tried to picture my mother's face on that day, and I couldn't. The memory was gone, not faded, but surgically removed, leaving a smooth, blank void where a precious moment used to be. The bear felt heavy in my arms, a paw tray. At another booth, Sarah had to hum the melody of the lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her. She hummed it perfectly, her eyes closed in concentration. The prize was a beautiful, hand-carved music box. When she tried to hum the tune again later, all that came out was a tuneless, empty breath. The music box, however, played the melody flawlessly. We were children. We didn't understand the transaction. We were trading pieces of our soul for cheap trinkets and fleeting joy. We were feeding the carnival. The Ferris wheel didn't run on electricity. It seemed to be powered by the shrieks of joyous terror from its riders. The funhouse mirrors didn't just distort your reflection. They seemed to show you older, sadder, more tired versions of yourself. Every ride, every game, every moment of manufactured happiness was a siphoning. We left that night with our arms full of prizes and our hearts feeling strangely light, strangely empty. The carnival was gone the next morning, as silently as it had arrived. The field was empty, not even a single blade of grass disturbed. For years, it was just a strange, shared memory among the kids of my generation. But the effects lingered. We were a quiet cohort, prone to melancholy, with strange gaps in our personal histories. We were people with slightly less color, slightly less warmth. I moved away, went to college, and built a life for myself. But the memory of that carnival always haunted the edges of my mind. Last summer, driven by a gnawing, inexplicable nostalgia, I decided to try and find it. I searched online forums for urban legends, for stories of traveling carnivals that appeared and disappeared. I found a pattern, a string of small, dying towns, each visited once, decades apart, and always the same stories of a silent, beautiful, and utterly soul-crushing fair. I found it in a Rust Belt town in Pennsylvania, identical to how I remember it. The same discordant music, the same sad, silent workers. But I wasn't a child anymore. I saw it now with adult eyes, and the horror of it settled in my bones. I walked the midway, a ghost from the carnival's past, and I watched the town's children, their faces bright with excitement, trading away pieces of themselves for glass baubles and cheap plush toys. I saw a young boy win a prize for perfect, describing the smell of his family's kitchen during the holidays. He buried his face in his new prize, a giant stuffed lion, and when he looked up, his eyes had a new, hollow quality. He sniffed the air, a confused frown on his face, as if trying to recall something he'd never known. Then I saw the main attraction, the one I had been too scared to enter as a child, the gallery of forgotten smiles. I paid the single, tarnished token and stepped inside. The tent was filled with life-sized, eerily realistic wax figures, posed in scenes of mundane happiness. A family laughing around a dinner table. A young couple holding hands on a park bench. A child opening a gift on Christmas morning. Their faces were frozen in expressions of pure, unadulterated joy. But their eyes were empty, utterly, terrifyingly vacant. And then I saw her, at the very back of the gallery, a new figure, one I didn't recognize. A woman with my friend Sarah's exact features, posed as if she were about to sing, her mouth open, her face a mask of theatrical bliss. She was holding a beautiful, hand-carved music box. I stumbled out of the tent, my heart hammering. I finally understood the carnival didn't just take memories. When you ran out of small things to trade, when you wanted the grand prize, it took your soul, your joy, your essence, and left a beautiful, hollow shell. A new attraction for the Carnival of Souls. The silent carnies weren't the owners. They were the exhibits. They were the prizes. I looked at the carny running the Ferris, wheel his face, a mask of weary sadness. I saw the faint scar above his eye and recognized him. He was a boy from my town who had disappeared the day after the carnival left, 30 years ago. He had won the grand prize. He had become part of the show. He was home. I worked the night shift at the St. Jude County Morgue, a job that requires a strong stomach and an even stronger sense of professional detachment. The dead are my quiet companions. They tell their stories in the language of lividity and trauma. I thought I had seen every horror the human body could endure. I was wrong. The horror I was about to encounter wasn't interested in the body. It was interested in what the body leaves behind. It began with the body of an old man, a Mr. Abernathy, who had died alone in his home. He arrived at my slab, a standard case of heart failure. But when I unzipped the bag, I noticed something profoundly strange. He looked peaceful, not the slack-jawed emptiness of death, but a deep, serene tranquility. his features so tense, and worried in his driver's license photo were smooth. The coroner called it an anomaly, a rare relaxation of the facial muscles. I called it unsettling. The next one was a young woman, a victim of a tragic car accident. Her body was broken, but her face held that same impossible serenity. The deep lines of pain and fear that should have been etched there were simply gone. It was like looking at a marble statue, beautiful and utterly devoid of any trace of her final, terrifying moment. This time, I also noticed something else. Faint, gray, dust-like smudges on her eyelids and lips, almost like ash. When I tried to wipe it away, it dissolved, leaving the skin beneath cold and unnaturally smooth. I started keeping a private log. Every few weeks, a body would arrive bearing the same two signs, the preternatural piece and the strange, ashen residue. I ran a tox screen on the residue. The results were inconclusive. It wasn't any known substance. It had no discernible chemical makeup. It was just inert. My rational mind cycled through possibilities. A new, unknown embalming fluid used by a rival funeral home. A bizarre post-mortem ritual. But the cases were unrelated, from different parts of the county, handled by different paramedics. The only common denominator was a death preceded by intense, prolonged suffering or grief. Mr. Abernathy had been a recluse, grieving his wife for decades. The young woman had been trapped in her car for hours before she died. The fear truly began when I started hearing sounds, a faint, dry, scratching sound from within the cold storage units late at night. I'd check, of course, pulling out the heavy, refrigerated drawers. Nothing. Just my silent companions, sleeping their final sleep. But the sound persisted, a skittering, furtive noise, like dry fingernails on steel. Then, one night, the power failed. The backup generator kicked in, but for a full 30 seconds, the morgue was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness and silence. I was frozen in the center of the main autopsy suite. In that 30 seconds of black, I heard it clearly. A soft, wet, sighing sound coming from the corner of the room. It was a sound of profound satisfaction, of a deep hunger being sated. It was followed by a faint, dry smacking of lips. When the lights flickered back on, I was alone. But the air was thick with the smell of old cemeteries, of damp earth, and something else. Something like dried, withered flowers. And on the floor, leading from the cold storage units to the dark corner, was a trail of that same grey, ashen dust. I didn't sleep for a week. I installed a motion-activated infrared camera, hoping to catch a vagrant or a disturbed individual. For nights, it recorded nothing but me, a ghostly white figure pacing my sterile domain. Then, I got the body of a child. It was the hardest part of my job, and this one was particularly tragic. A long battle with a terrible illness. The grief that surrounded this small body was a palpable thing in the room. I knew it would come for this one. That night, I watched 5 feed from my office, my heart a cold stone in my chest. Around 3 a.m., the camera feed flickered. A wave of infrared static washed over the screen, and then I saw it. It unfolded itself from the shadows beneath a gurney, a creature of nightmare and deprivation. It was humanoid, but emaciated, its skin a tight grey parchment stretched over a frame of impossibly long, thin bone. It moved with a silent, spider-like grace, its head low to the ground. It had no eyes, just smooth, sunken sockets. Its mouth was a wide, lipless slit. It didn't approach the child's body with ravenous hunger. It approached it with a chilling reverence. It knelt beside the small form, and from its lipless mouth, its long, grey tongue, like a dried leaf, emerged. It didn't lick or bite. It gently, tenderly dusted the child's face, lapping at the air just above the skin. It wasn't eating flesh. I realized with a surge of absolute soul-crushing horror what it was doing. It was consuming the grief, the pain, the lingering psychic residue of a life of suffering. The grey ash wasn't a substance it left behind. It was its spoor, its excrement. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the creature finished its meal. The child's face, once etched with the pain of a long illness, slowly smoothed into that same awful, empty peace. The creature sighed, that same sound of deep satisfaction, and then it turned its featureless face directly towards the camera, towards me. It knew I was watching. The lipless slit of its mouth opened, and it let out a sound, not a roar or a shriek, but a perfect mimicry of my own tired, grief-filled sigh from earlier that day. It had tasted my own sorrow in the air. It has been a month since that night. I quit my job. I moved to a new city, but I can't escape it. I know what it is now. It's a ghoul, but not from any legend I've ever read. It is a creature drawn to the emotional carrion of our world, and it has acquired a new taste. It's no longer satisfied with the cold, stale grief of the dead. It wants it fresh. It wants it raw. It wants it from the source. Sometimes, late at night, in my new, sterile apartment, I smell it. The faint scent of damp earth and dried flowers. I hear a faint, dry scratching at my door. It has followed me. It has tasted my sorrow, and it knows. I am a veritable feast of loneliness and fear. And it is a very, very patient hunter. My first winter as a fire warden at the lonely watchtower on Black Ridge was supposed to be a quiet one. The tower was a glass and steel cage perched on a metal scaffold 100 feet above a sea of pine trees, accessible only by a winding, single-lane dirt road. After the first heavy snow of December, I was completely cut off, a king in a silent, white kingdom. The peace was absolute, the kind of profound quiet that feels like a blessing. I had a crackling wood stove, a stockpile of books, and a powerful radio to connect me to the world. It was perfect until the silence became the enemy. It happened on the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. I was watching the snow fall, thick, heavy flakes drifting down in the beam of my spotlight. Around 10 p.m., I noticed something odd. The wind, which had been a constant, sighing presence, had completely died. Not a whisper. Then I realized the gentle creak and groan of the tower itself had stopped. The hum from my small refrigerator, the buzz of the radio, all gone. It wasn't that the power was out. The lights were still on. The sounds themselves had just ceased to exist. I stepped out onto the narrow catwalk that encircled the glass room. The air was frigid, and so utterly still, it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. The snow was falling in a dead, play-straight line, making no sound as it landed on the already deep drifts below. No owls, no rustle of unseen animals, nothing. It was a perfect, absolute, vacuum-sealed silence. I shouted, and the sound died a foot from my lips, absorbed by the stillness. It was the most unnatural thing I had ever experienced. I retreated inside, my heart beginning a frantic, loud tattoo against my ribs. In the oppressive silence, my own heartbeat, my own breathing were deafening. I turned on a portable radio, twisting the dial. Nothing but a faint, dead hiss. I spent an hour trying to diagnose the problem, checking fuses, fiddling with wires, before a chilling thought occurred to me. The equipment wasn't broken. The silence was a phenomenon outside the tower, a bubble of pure null sound that had enveloped my world. That's when I saw the first one. I was scanning the edge of the tree line with my powerful binoculars. I saw a flicker of movement, something tall and pale moving between the snow-laden pines. I focused the binoculars, my hands shaking. It was humanoid, but emaciated, its skin the color of bleached bone. Its limbs were too long, its joints moving with a jerky, insect-like motion. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank surface. It moved for a few feet, then froze perfectly still, as if listening. I saw another one then, and another, a dozen of them, maybe more, emerging from the deep woods, all moving with the same silent, unnatural gait. They were hunting, and I realized with a surge of pure terror what the silence was for. They were blind. They hunted by sound. The silent night wasn't a peaceful event. It was their cover. It was the perfect hunting ground, an acoustic dead zone where their prey couldn't hear them coming, and they could pinpoint any sound with terrifying precision. My breathing, my heartbeat, they were beacons in the dark. I tried to slow my heart to breathe shallowly, but the panic was a tidal wave. I saw one of the creatures suddenly whip its blank face towards my tower. It had heard my frantic pulse. It took a jerky, deliberate step towards the tree line. Then another. I needed to make noise. I needed to create a distraction, a cacophony to confuse them. I grabbed a metal pot and a spoon and started banging them together. The sound jarringly, loud inside my small glass room, but I knew it was barely a whisper outside. I turned my radio up to full volume, the dead hiss, a pathetic defense. I cranked the handle on the old air raid siren on the roof, a relic from the Cold War. It let out a groaning, strangled squeal before dying, its gears frozen solid. The creatures were getting closer. I could see them clearly now, gathering at the base of my tower. They moved in a strange, stop-motion way. They would take a few steps, then freeze, their heads tilting, listening. Then they would move again. I realized they were moving in the split-second intervals between my panicked noises, between the beats of my own terrified heart. I was trapped. My only hope was to create a continuous, overwhelming sound. The wood stove. I pried open the iron door and began feeding it everything I could. My books, my spare clothes, the wooden chairs. The fire roared to life. A beautiful, crackling, popping sound. The creatures at the base of the tower recoiled, their smooth faces turned away from the noise, their bodies twitching in agitation. It was working, but my fuel was finite. I burned through everything combustible in the tower over the next few hours. My library, my furniture, my food stores, all of it went into the fire, a desperate sacrifice to the god of noise. As dawn approached, I was down to my last few logs. The fire was dying, the crackling sound diminishing. The creatures were growing, bolder again, creeping closer to the metal legs of the tower. I heard a new sound then, a faint, rhythmic scrah, scrah. One of them had started to climb. The sun crested the ridge, a sliver of brilliant, beautiful orange. As the first rays of light hit the valley, the world came back to life. The wind sighed through the pines. A bird chirped. The silence shattered like glass. I looked down. The creatures were gone, vanished back into the deep woods, as if they had never been. All that was left were strange, deep tracks in the snow. The long, deep scratches on one of the metal legs of my tower, starting from the ground and reaching 20 feet up. I was rescued 2 days later. I never went. The official report lists my experience as a bout of severe cabin fever. But I know what I saw. I know that in the deepest, quietest parts of the world, on the longest, darkest nights, the silence itself can become a weapon. And the things that wield it are patient. They are listening. And they are waiting for the world to go quiet again. We were sent to map the deep wilderness of what the locals called the Whispering Woods, a vast, uncharted tract of old-growth forest in the Pacific Northwest. I was the lead surveyor for a timber company, and my partner, Dave, was a seasoned botanist. Our job was to spend a summer charting the terrain, identifying tree species, and assessing the land for potential logging. The woods were beautiful, ancient, and from the very first day, profoundly unsettling. There was a constant, low murmur in the air, a sound that wasn't wind or water, but felt like the forest itself was breathing around us. The first anomaly was the path. We followed a clear, well-trodden animal trail for the first few miles. But when we tried to backtrack to our base camp at the end of the day, the trail was gone. Not overgrown, but completely vanished, replaced by impenetrable thickets of thorn and bramble. It took us hours of hacking our way through the undergrowth to find our camp, which was less than a mile away. We were disoriented, scratched up and unnerved. Dave, ever the scientist, blamed it on a shared delusion brought on by fatigue. The second anomaly was the trees. They were wrong. We found groves of ancient redwoods, twisted together, in impossible helix-like formations, as if they had grown, pair in a corkscrew pattern. We saw pines with bark that had the texture and color of cured meat, and which bled a thick, coppery sap when cut. Dave was ecstatic, thinking he'd discovered a dozen new species. I felt a growing, primal dread. The forest didn't feel like a collection of individual plants. It felt like a single, massive organism, and we were trespassing in its guts. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just the sound of the forest breathing anymore. We started hearing voices, faint, mocking imitations of our own conversations from earlier in the day, echoing from the deep woods. We'd hear my voice call Dave's name from the left, even as I stood silently to his right. It was a psychological war, designed to separate us, to make us doubt our own senses. Then came the gifts. We would return to our camp to find strange arrangements of sticks and stones laid out in a perfect circle around our tent. Inside the circle would be a dead animal, a bird, a squirrel not mauled or eaten, but perfectly preserved, its body strangely flattened and desiccated, as if all the moisture had been squeezed out of it, and its form would be subtly wrong. The bird's wings would be bent at an unnatural angle. The squirrel's tail would be braided into its own fur. They weren't warnings. They felt like artistic statements, like specimens. Dave's scientific curiosity finally gave way to terror when we found the clearing. It was a meadow of unnaturally vibrant green moss, and in the center stood what we initially thought was a strange, petrified tree. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't a tree, it was a deer, or it had been. Its body was frozen mid-stride, its legs elongated and twisted into root-like structures that dug deep into the moss. Its antlers had branched out into a complex canopy of woody limbs, complete with small green leaves. Its head was thrown back, its mouth open in a silent, eternal scream. It had been absorbed. The forest turned it into a part of itself. We ran. We abandoned our equipment, our research, everything. We just ran, trying to get back to the logging road where we'd left our truck. But the forest wouldn't let us go. The paths shifted before our eyes. Trees would groan and move, their thick roots pulling from the earth to block our way. The whispers were a constant torment, calling our names, mimicking the sounds of our loved ones crying for help, trying to lure us deeper into the green labyrinth. We were lost for 2 days, dehydrated, exhausted, and hunted. On the second night, huddled together under a rocky overhang, Dave broke. "It's in my head," he whispered, his eyes wide with madness. "I can feel it. It's showing me things. How to grow, how to join." He looked down at his hands. On the back of his right hand, a small green sprout was pushing its way through his skin. He screamed, a high, thin sound of utter horror. He scrambled to his feet and ran blindly into the woods, away from me, away from the thing that was growing inside him. I called his name, but my voice was swallowed by the chorus of mocking whispers. I never saw him again. I don't know how I survived. Maybe the forest having chosen its new specimen, lost interest in me. I stumbled for another day, my mind a blank slate of terror, until I collapsed on what turned out to be the edge of the logging road. I was found by a passing truck driver, half dead from exposure. I tried to tell them what happened. They said I was delirious, that Dave had probably fallen into a ravine. But I know the truth. The terror in the woods isn't a beast that stalks the shadow. It's the shadows themselves. It's the trees, the soil, the very air you breathe. It's a single, ancient, intelligent organism with a will of alien artistry and a terrible, patient hunger. It doesn't want to kill you. It wants to collect you. It wants to plant you in its verdant, silent gallery and watch you grow into something new and beautiful and screaming. Dave isn't dead. He's just rooted. And he's probably the most exotic specimen the Whispering Woods has seen in a very long time. And so the forest holds its secrets, and another soul is lost to the whispers in the woods, from the grave to the carnival, from the morgue to the silent snow. The lesson remains the same. There are hungers in this world that time cannot diminish. There are entities that feed not on our flesh, but on the very essence of our lives, our memories, our sorrows, our fears. They are the patient predators, the quiet collectors. The next time you find yourself in a place that feels wrong, a place where the silence is too loud or the joy feels too cheap, trust that feeling. It is the oldest instinct we have. It is the whisper of the soul, warning you that you have trespassed into a story that does not have a happy ending. Thank you for joining us in the shadows. Look after your memories, guard your sorrows, and be wary of the silence. This is Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Sleep well if you can.